the previous videos, we mentioned about the conclusions of the research paper, which is the last part of the research paper that brings everything together from the problem, objective, methodology to the result and findings as acquired from your research study. It shows the connections between the objective and the findings of your research and demonstrate the entire research in one piece, following a certain theme with a clear purpose, which is significance to the society or the field of study. We also mentioned about the components of typical conclusions, which include restating your research topic, restating the thesis, summarizing the main point, stating the significance of the result, and concluding your thoughts. It was mentioned that most of the students are able to comply with the first three components. They are able to restate their research topic and provide a good summaries of the main point. However, it is noted that the conclusion should have elevated from the main points that you have acquired from the investigations, where you will need to show the connections of your research study with the readers, or with the reality, with the social, with the nations, or with the world as a broader context. The significance of your research study needs to be stated, and you should also conclude your thoughts, giving some takeaway message for the readers to ponder with, and providing some anchors for the readers, which in future they encounter the similar topic, they can quickly recall what you have done and then seeking mechanism to retrieve your papers. In these videos, we're going to discuss further regarding how you can construct your conclusions. Let us look into it one by one. First, you can present what has been learned from your investigations or your research program. There will be a very brief and concise analyzing of the findings. You will need to refrain yourself from presenting a lot of numbers, as you know that you are now trying to phasing out your main text at the conclusions. You do not want to burden the readers with a lot of numbers, which demand further concentrations of the reader. In fact, your focus now is to highlight the significant findings, more in the form of concepts or principles, so that they can easily recall after they have read your papers. You may also need to establish the valuable new information uncovered. This is to tell the readers that the novelty of your research, what are the new things that you have discovered through your investigations, which is not being considered previously. It is like declaring your contributions to the field of the study, so that the research community is able to distinguish your papers with the others. You may also inspire new hypotheses for further study, which is often developed on basis of the new information that you have discovered in your research study. Ideally, there should be a logical connections between the new things that you have discovered, which through projections and forecasting that is likely used to a new hypothesis for the future study. Next, you can also generate links for future study, which you can suggest interesting directions for further study, which is normally on basis of the result that you have acquired from the investigations. This can happen in two aspects. First is you discover certain things from your investigations, and then as logical projections from the discovery, It brings in new ideas for further study, or new directions, or even the needs for further clarifications. The second way, it will be on basis of the result that you have acquired. Probably there are some limitations which the methodology can be improved by doing some refinement or fine-tuning that can lead to increase in terms of the quality of the results that is acquired from the investigation program. Or you may also propose another approach of the research that could yield you similar results in order to cross-check your findings. In order to do this, you will need to be very familiar with your current research, gain adequate understanding of the findings as acquired from the research study, and you might need to review into your methodology, seeking for the areas to improve, as well as the aspect needs to be further clarified in order to further prove your hypothesis, findings, or certain speculations that you have made during the discussions of your results. This brings us to the next point, where you can do evaluations of the flaws in your research process. You will need to evaluate if there is any apparent problem with the experiment, whether there is any weaknesses or error in the design which may have influenced the results, and point out the compromises made in the research design. If you are doing so, you will need to justify the methodology and reasoning behind it. You can consider this is a self-review part for yourself, as well as providing adequate information to the reader what actually happened, indicating the limitations of your research study or the methodology used in order for you to acquire the results, so that the readers is aware of any potential weaknesses or error, or even boundaries in terms of the scope that your finding is applicable of. Normally, I will encourage the student to do this, and you will need to review your research process carefully and then report it honestly to the readers. If you actually detected some errors or weaknesses, you should not try to hide it. Instead, you should highlight those weaknesses and define the boundaries, identifying the areas which is not significantly affected by the weaknesses, as well as the areas which may have significantly altered by these weaknesses. This is to make our way to the readers the coverage and applicable range of the findings that you have presented in your research paper. You might also need to declare what is the benefit of the research. That means you will need to evaluate the advantage and the benefit of the research, as well as the implications of the research to the reader, society, nations, and to the world at a broader context. Next, you can make a suggestion based upon the conclusions, which you can give recommendations on basis of the results. This one, it will be very dependent on your personal judgment, as well as your comprehensions of the previous study, and this will require critical thinking, as well as the reasoning ability. You may also suggest for refinements of the experimental design, so that it can cover broader aspects, or to be able to acquire the result of better quality, or so that it is carried out in the more economical manner, and so on so forth. You know that in most of the cases, the research design cannot be 100% perfect. There will be some limitations. Most likely there will be some compromising throughout your entire research. If you can identify those and you identify the significance of rectifying those, you can put them in the suggestions for the conclusions. This is to remind the reader or the future researcher to pay more attention on certain things so that they do not repeat the similar error that you have went through. Of course, you can highlight the interesting area for the further study, and you should pull together all the findings into a coherent argument. Next, you may also summarize the strength of the results, such as you appraise the robustness of your research design, experiments, analysis, and conclusions. This can be reflected by indicating the confidence level, boundary, applicable conditions, and etc. What you see here is there are so many to cover in the conclusions. You can take this as a guideline for you while constructing for your conclusions. Having so many to be covered, but if you look into them carefully, they are actually an extension of the 5 components for the conclusions. You may not necessarily to cover every single aspect here in your conclusions, as this will make your conclusions to be extremely long, which defeat the purposes of the conclusions, that the reader is actually phasing out their task of reading your paper. You should not overburden with so many informations in the conclusions. There shouldn't be too many new informations, except for your thoughts on what next. What you can do here is, you can take this as a checklist for you to construct your conclusions, which you will see your conclusions to be extremely long, and then you look into the purpose of your conclusions, as well as the quality of your findings, the significance of your findings, and also look at the aspects of the futures, the quality of your recommendations, whether it is impactful, whether it is going to amaze the reader, or it is just a normal suggestions for the reader, which anyone can think of. Then out of so many informations in the conclusions, you will need to choose those which is significant and impactful to be remain in your conclusions. Make sure you cover all the 5 components of the conclusions, and then the rest, it should be all with the impactful statements or some insights, some good ideas, some thoughts that the reader should ponder about after reading your paper. You will need to make every word in the conclusion counts, minimize the redundancy, use appropriate terminology, and ensure everything is put into together in a coherent manner. Making conclusions is quite difficult, and then most of the time, your supervisor and your examiner may not also be able to help you to construct your conclusions. It will be very much dependent on your purpose of your study, but what your supervisor and the examiner will know is whether your conclusions is conclusive enough, or is it significant enough, or is it really impactful to the readers. I see in most of the situations, the supervisors are not satisfied with the conclusions constructed by the postgraduate students. But if the postgraduate students ask back to the supervisor, how should the conclusions be done? Normally, supervisor also not giving the clear directions, giving hand-to-hand guidance on constructing his own conclusion. This is in fact quite normal, because the person knowing the best about the research is actually the students. The students definitely spend more time with the research as compared to the supervisor. And then the entire thesis is written by the students. The writing styles, the emphasis, and the purpose of the thesis is also very much dependent of the students. At the end of the day, A good conclusions will have to come up by the student themselves. Therefore, you will see your supervisor not really satisfied with your conclusions, stating that your conclusion is not conclusive enough. I believe most likely it will be due to the two components that you are missing. Of course, sometimes there will be also contributions by the third component, where you might not be able to identify the real significant points to be put into your conclusions. In fact, you are putting whichever point that you feel you have discovered in your study, and this gives a long list of the conclusion statements, and this is very difficult for the readers to memorize everything. I would say that whichever point comes to the conclusions, those should be significant points. Normally, it will not be more than 3 to 6 main points. In fact, 3 main points here is good enough for me. If you are talking about the main points more than 6, first, the readers will not be able to recall every single one of them. Second, you lose emphasis on the main point. You know that the conclusions have the functions of stressing certain things. When you have too much information in the conclusions, the emphasis loses. It will automatically bring to the readers a perception that the reader needs to recall so many things, and everything seems to be equally important, and this is likely leads to a situation that the readers will overlook the takeaway message you would like the readers to have. There is one more point about the conclusions. Remember, we mentioned about planning your research in the methodology section. You know that you are using the simplest models of 1-to-1 here, which you will have the numbers of objectives. You should theoretically structure your conclusions in accordance to the sequence of your objectives. You should make clear to the readers that you are actually answering to which objective of your research study. This is so that you allow the readers can do direct comparison or cross-checking between the objective and the conclusions, as I normally do as a supervisor and as an examiner for the postgraduate students.